Well, guys, welcome. We are here live for the Light the Fire Roundtable discussion. I am pumped about this. Selfishly, I'm excited about the questions we're going to ask today because I want to learn from you guys. We've got the all fun, exciting topic of failure. I've already made it known to you guys that I'm not a fan of failure. It's not my favorite subject, but we're going to put you guys in the hot seat. So, as you know, I'm Melody Belotte. I'm your moderator, and I wanted to quickly just introduce who we got around the table. So first off, we've got Ellen Waltemire, founder, principal of One Step Closer Coaching. My goodness, that's a mouthful. 40 years of leadership management, mentoring, and personal development experience. The woman knows her stuff. She holds an MBA and a master's degree in counseling and guidance. Coaching certification from the Institute of Professional Excellence in Coaching. So welcome, Ellen Waltemire. We're so glad to have you here today.
Excited to be here. Thanks, Melody.
Yeah. Also here, we've got beside me Chris Jones. Chris Jones is the lead pastor of Hope Community Church, where we are today. Beautiful facility. 20 plus years in ministry. I'm sure you have a lot of good stories to tell.
A few.
Also a business owner, an entrepreneur. You've got a bunch of different projects, some in the technology space, rental properties, childcare centers. So I love the perspective you're going to bring to the conversation, not just from the ministry side, but also the business side. This guy leads in a wide variety of capacities. So welcome, Chris.
Thanks, Melody.
And then last but not least, Mark Botros, principal at Noblest, which is a Washington, D.C. think tank, research and development for science and technology. So watch out, we got a nerd in the room, a fellow nerd. He's a life and business strategist to the Fortune 500, the Ivy League, the government. And what we were talking about before we started rolling was you're a host of a podcast, the Life Works podcast. So we're all eager to check that out. Well, guys, we're going to dive right into it. We want to make the most of this time. We've talked about all of your accolades, all of your impressive accomplishments, what you guys have done, and don't want to diminish that at all, but we're here to talk about failure. So we're just going to go for it. We're just going to hit you between the eyes. One of the questions that was submitted was, what is your greatest failure, and how are you working through it? What is your greatest failure, and how are you working through it? I'm going to pick on you, Chris, if you don't mind answering that question first.
Start with the pastor.
That's right. That's right.
So, greatest failure in the moment, because I think if you live life long enough, those things don't end up being failures necessarily. So I want to clarify with that. But about 8 years ago, going on 9 years ago, somewhere around there, my wife was had been in a public accounting for 15 years, and we were having this discussion about her doing something else. And I've always been a huge proponent of supporting my wife in whatever endeavor she wants to go into. And so she said, man, I think God just wants me to do something with more influence. And so we decided to buy this business. It was already established, and it was a train wreck. It was a train wreck. And so as a guy who prides himself on figuring things out and turn this knob, plug this in, turn this bolt, and everything works, for about 5 years, nothing worked. It just didn't work. And it was extremely difficult. I mean, we ended up in counseling, the whole 9 yards, it was a train wreck. And so through that, I would say in that 5-year season, it did classify as my greatest failure. We couldn't get out of it. We had everything we had tied up in it, and so you just felt the weight of it day after day after day after day. I wouldn't classify that as a failure now. We still own the business, and it's doing very well. So I think, depending on when you ask the question or when you get into the circumstance defining it as failure, I don't quit very easily, and so we ended up working through things, and we actually have people that run it now. My wife does something else, but yeah, that was a big one for us. It was kind of, we jumped into something we didn't understand totally, because we were confident people could pull it off.
And so how did you get through it?
massive amounts of grit and determination in the grace of God. And which you may get into later, but the determination to not quit.
Okay.
And so this was a circumstance where we had people depending on us. We had employees and families, and we just quit wasn't in the equation for us. And so we just kept at it, got good advice, got good counsel. When we needed it personally, we went and got counsel, and so then the grace of God.
Yeah.
Which as a pastor, I can't undervalue that. So
Sure. Yeah, that's really wise. Getting resources, getting guidance, and not just trying to power through it alone, but pulling in a team of people. That's good.
Yeah, I think the
counsel.
famous quote is the unknown unknowns, the things you don't know. Mm-hmm. Those can lead to failure, and that's fine. But you have to, at some point in time, know the things you don't know.
Yeah.
And you don't necessarily have those resources all the time with you don't know all that stuff, so it's important to bring people around you to figure that out. So
Yeah.
we started getting on that bandwagon pretty quick. We don't know what we're doing, so we better get somebody else.
I've been there. Mary Ellen, how about you?
So, this is a great one, Melody, because I feel like mine is not business related, but more personal related. I worked for a university system a few years ago, and my choice to listen to one person only when I was applying for promotion and tenure in our system resulted in my biggest failure of not getting promoted to that next level of a faculty member. I've always wanted to be the top level, whatever that is. So I didn't lose my job, which is great, but I failed at getting to that next level of being a faculty member and things like that. Again, because of a choice I made to listen just to one person. So I certainly aspire to your notes to say, it's good to have a whole tribe of individuals that are helping you be successful. So once I got the word that I did not get that next level of promotion, I thought, I could have said, I'm not going to do it. It's not important. And it was very important for me to go back, do it all over again. And what I chose to do it that second time around, right? Because there's always a choice to do it or not to do it. So I made the choice to involve lots of other people who had been there, done that in a similar fashion to what I needed to do. So getting a group of people to support your goals, I think, is what's really pretty important. For me anyway. So the good news was I was successful the second time around, and that's okay. And I learned a lot from that first time. My self-confidence took a nosedive for sure.
Doesn't it always?
I know I'm doing what I need to do. Why isn't this working? But so that's my biggest failure, I guess, in my professional world.
Yeah, and I love how you not only said what was the failure, but then also what you learned from it, how you adjusted, and how the result was different the next time. That's a big piece of this whole conversation about failure. I think we're so afraid to fail. We're taught, success is best. Always succeed. And when actually you learn more from the failures a lot of times.
And keeping that determination, like you meant the grit and things like that, just knowing that, I want to be there, so I just have to kind of pivot and go around a different way or that kind of thing. So making sure that you use your energy the way you need to, I guess, is the other thought.
Yeah. Mark, any stories come to mind?
I have so many, so many. Like it's funny. I almost put it in my bio. Like I'm like the world's expert on failure.
You're in good company. We're all failures around this table.
And I think we all could say that. I think if you're paying attention, we all could say that. We are the world expert on failure. I've had so many that we could characterize as failure. I even had a job where the job was literally failure. The one that comes to mind, the failure that comes to mind, actually happened really, really early in my life, right out of high school. And I was, as you might imagine, I was an achiever growing up. Like I got straight A's or close to it. I was actually working from when I was a very young age, so I was even like a decade ahead of my peers. I was making money before any of my friends were. They were doing paper routes. I was working in graphic design and multimedia. When I was young, in my teenage years, I was literally making a beyond a living wage for my age. So I was way, way beyond. I was an achiever. So I think we've established that. But when I got to college, my dad pulled me aside and said, Mark, he's an entrepreneur. And he said, Mark, I can't put you through school. And I'm already in school. And I'm in engineering school, and it's a really rigorous way to go to school. And I had to figure out really quickly, how am I going to do this? So I went to work. And I made a really poor choice in that I decided to take a night job, working till like 3, 4 in the morning, and decided trying to get up for 8 a.m. calculus, right? Because I'm in engineering school. And you can already tell this is not going to work out, right? If you've lived long enough. This is really bad. And as you can imagine, my grades were really poor, actually. So they got progressively worse and worse and worse and worse. And I eventually failed out of college with a 0.96 GPA. I mean, you have to work hard. You have to work at it to fail that badly. You have to work, really. So anyway, and on top of that, I got hurt on the job. So it was just compounding. And for that to happen so early in my life, at that point where you feel you're most invincible, that was an incredible blow to me. I fell into depression. I was hurt. I spent months in and out of hospitals. My grades, I'd failed out of school, so I was a failure. I was hurt. I was you can imagine all the things that an 18-year-old would be thinking under those circumstances. My dad actually was the one who snapped me out of it. He sat me, the same person who sort of sent me into this tailspin. I don't blame him for that. I was the one responsible, but he was the one who snapped me out of it. And he said, Mark, you've got to snap out of this. And he came from the silent generation, right, where they didn't really say much and they didn't really express themselves emotionally. And he said, Mark, you've got to snap out of this. He said, I've had my moments where I was depressed, and I can tell you it's not a great place to be. And he told me about his own experiences. And when he opened up like that, it just startled me so much that I said, I've got to get out of this. I learned later on, and I got myself back in school, I raised my grades, I left that job, and it opened up all kinds of other opportunities. I ended up going and working my way through school over the next 12 years, and it was such a journey, including spending a couple of years performing on a cruise ship, and it was just a wild.
We got to hear about that.
A wild ride.
Maybe not this conversation, but we got to hear about that.
But I raised my grades. Ended up in community college. Raised my grades. Ended up 12 years later finishing school at University of Maryland, and then went on to get my master's and got married and put my life back together. But hindsight being 2020, I think the thing that I learned was that I'm not a bad student, and I can't judge myself based on that one failure. Because at the time I did. I'd say I'm a terrible student, I'm not good, I'm hurt, and all that. And but rather I just made poor choices at the time, and so that was a really instructive time for me, and it really set up a lot of the values that I have today and the way my outlook on life today. So so it was a pretty intense time of real colossal failures, but working through all of that and looking back on it, it really helped shape who I became today.
Yeah. It's funny, the one consistent thing I'm hearing from all of you guys is voices that spoke into your life. Oh, yeah. When you felt like you were at your lowest point, or when you had a colossal failure, there were just some powerful voices. And so for those that are listening in on this conversation, I would say that's a takeaway to write down. And if you are, watching this live, we want you guys to write in your questions. We would love to feature you here at this conversation. But let's pull another one. This is a good one. When do you decide that failing at something is no longer worth the effort? When is it time to throw in the towels per se and stop grinding, stop pushing? How do you make that distinction? And I'll just leave the question on the table, and whoever wants to pick it up, how do you decide that failing at something is no longer worth the effort?
I asked my wife. I'm not good. I'm not good enough.
She's your discernment.
She is my discernment for sure. For me, because she's rational. I'm not. She'll say, Mark, you got to cut bait and run on this.
Yeah.
Because me, I will stick, to it until it's just a bad idea, right?
So your wife?
My wife is my voice of reason.
What about you guys?
Yeah, I think my family also, but I feel like if you're really very passionate and this is a goal, there's got to be a way to get to it, So I said, just keep it on until you figure it out. You may not go down this way, but you may have to go around this way to get it done. You may need to involve different individuals as resources, as confidence, as guides, and that kind of thing. So unless it's a crisis or a health kind of thing, you can do almost anything, I feel. So
what I'm hearing is you don't give up on the dream, you just change the approach.
Correct.
There may
That would
be a
be my
different
thought.
path, a different road,
Right.
but the destination is still,
if
you
it's
don't
something that you're
let go of
passionate
that.
about, right? If you're something very passionate and that's your goal, there's a way to do it, right?
I love that.
What do you
Yeah.
think, Chris?
In my world, I would phrase it like, is this what a calling on your life? Like everybody's trying to figure out what they're supposed to be doing. And when you find that, Mark talked about this long 12-year journey of getting through school and okay, so you get to a place in your life where you're like, oh, I know this is what I'm supposed to be doing. The Apostle Paul would talk about that even towards the end of his life, he was pressing on to do that thing that God had carved him out to do. All right. So there's that thing in my life, but it manifests itself in a whole bunch of different ways. So I'm a communicator, I'm a leader, I'm all these things. And so I asked myself, is this a high school job that isn't part of my calling? Like, yeah, quit that. Like let's not, in Mark's case, it might be something like that, where it's like, hey, this isn't central to your thing. And so like you said, your wife can come along and go, quit that, that's silly. But if it's central to your thing, it's central to the calling in your life, what you're supposed to be doing, then those are things we should really wrestle with before we quit. That we should really lean into and like you were saying, hey, maybe this is something that is just on the peripheral that I should easily be able to quit. But this thing over here that's central to what I'm doing, maybe I need to have another conversation with somebody else. Maybe I shouldn't quit. And I found out over the years that there's all kinds of things. So if this is the vein I'm running in, there'll be all kinds of things kind of over on the sides that I've really got to be good at going, I spent too much energy over here on this, I should just get rid of it. It's not central to who I am.
Yeah.
So kind of that guidepost going down through life.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I mean, we're all leaders around this table, and I don't want to speak for you guys, but I'm stubborn. I don't want to quit. I don't want to give up on things. And so sometimes, we don't want to have that title as a quitter, and we just keep on pushing because if I started it, I'm going to finish it, whether it's meant to be or not. It was funny when I was eating. This is a funny story. I was eating a salad one time, and there was a little piece of lettuce on the corner, and somebody was watching me eat, and I would take my fork, and I wouldn't let it go. Like I needed to clean the whole plate. He said, you're not a quitter, are you? And I said, I'm not a quitter. We'll finish this whole salad. That's good advice. Okay. So like I said, all leaders are on this table. You guys lead individuals, you lead teams. How do you handle the failures of maybe a coworker or a teammate, somebody that's under your care or under your leadership? What are some tactics or techniques, or how do you approach that when someone else fails around you?
That's a really good question. I think over the years, and I've been working for a long time, and I've led a lot of teams for a long time, and so I've seen that. I have found that, as in my case, I'm much harder on myself than I am on other people, And I think that in a high-performing team, typically, they tend to be similar. And so I find that handling the failure of others, it's important for me to be gracious in those moments with them, especially if they know that they failed. If they know, then my job is to be gracious. If they don't know and or were belligerent, that's a different story.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a
good distinction.
That's a different story because then either they lack self-awareness or they know better and did it anyway. And in that case, then I must be ruthless, actually. Just a very quick story. We were on a project one time, really kind of big deal, intense environment. This was a $50 million deal, high innovation, and it's super, super intense. We had a new person come in, and he was on his first day. On his first day, he was inappropriate with one of the women on the team. And this, okay, if the person was like 21, 22 years old, okay, well, all right, they need correction, right? No, you don't do that, you don't say that. This guy was pushing 60 and had gone through all the harassment courses throughout his career. Day one, I mean like minute one, I went straight up to him and said, "You are no longer welcome on this project.
Wow.
You're gone." He said, "Where am I going to go?" I said, "I don't care. Go." And in that moment, so that was a failure. That was
Sure.
an intentional failure. That was a guardrail failure, as Chris would put it, right? And he violated it. And I said, I have no patience or remorse for you. Go.
Yeah.
So, but for someone who's not aware or they even realize that they messed up, no, there's a lot more grace for people like that.
Yeah, I love that distinction.
Yeah, and I feel like, too, it's okay to say to people, can I provide some feedback, right? So if people don't recognize it, then you need to help them recognize it. If they recognize that they've made an error, mistake, or had a failure, to say, so let me help you think about that. So what was the worst thing that happened, right? What will you do the next time? Rather than just say you're done, and I understand that failure. Sometimes, your self-confidence kind of tanks and that kind of thing. And, assure them that, yep, I know you've got the skills, you've got the ability, that's why you're here doing what you're doing. Yeah. And if you can just say, so what did you learn, right? Because with every choice, there is a learning opportunity. So pointing that out to say, you've got it, I know you can do better, and tell me what it's going to look like the next time, perhaps.
And I'm hearing two things in there, affirmation and permission. Permission, can I speak into your life? Can I give you some feedback?
Absolutely.
Do I have permission to say this? And then affirmation of here's,
exactly.
I see this in you. I see what you can become.
Right.
And that's another powerful thing.
Yeah.
Right.
Thanks, Melody.
We're in the church world. We're leading mostly volunteers, so you have hundreds of volunteers in a church, and so we ask two questions: is it a failure of trying, or like a systemic failure of not fitting?
Okay.
And so if it's a failure of trying, well, then that we can work through the process of, hey, we didn't train you enough, or we didn't give you the right mentality wasn't there. So those are things you can work through. If it's systemic failure over and over and over again, especially in volunteerism, we didn't put you in the right place. You're not in the right job.
We made a mistake.
Yeah, we made the mistake. And even in the business world, look, it's incumbent upon managers and leaders in the business world to get the right, everybody's heard, the right people in the right bus in the right seat doing the right job.
Yeah.
And so much frustration comes along because, well, this person keeps failing. Well, you keep promoting them in the same job that they keep failing at. And I just listened to a podcast the other day, said we rise to our level of incompetence.
Yeah.
So, we're typically promoted to the point until we can't do the job. Because we were successful here in sales, and now we get promoted to management. Well, we're actually a terrible manager, but we were good at sales.
Yes,
so,
exactly.
So we don't go any higher. Well, the issue is upper management or leadership should be able to look at that and go, we put them in the wrong spot.
Yeah.
They should be back here in sales, and we should incentivize them in sales to just be really, really good at sales. And so the church world's the same way, except we're not, giving people salaries. It's volunteerism. So people's satisfaction in where they're volunteering has a lot to do with whether they're systemically failing or just failing from not having enough information. So when we look at that, we go, okay, this person keeps failing over and over, their satisfaction level's going down. And so it's incumbent upon us to find them a position where that stops.
Yeah.
Where they're doing what they're good at, doing what fulfills them. And that's so important for leaders to have an eye to see that. Okay, this person tried and failed. It's just an information situation. This person hasn't succeeded since we put them in that spot.
Yeah.
That still looks totally different, and they're miserable.
Yeah.
So let's pull them out of there and figure out what they're good at.
Yeah. I love that you're kind of shedding light on, we all have a piece in the failure, whether you are, whether you're a supervisor, whether you're being led, kind of owning your part of the failure and saying, what can I do to help you succeed? What can we do to make this better? Another one of the questions we had was from that perspective of the leadership. So thinking about this may take you guys back to earlier days in your careers, thinking about some leaders that you worked with. How would you deal with a leader who really has it doesn't allow for failure, or doesn't have an appetite for failure, where it's just not an option? Success all the way. Have you guys ever worked with or for somebody like that? And what advice would you give to somebody who's watching who might be in that spot right now, where they just feel that pressure of, I cannot fail?
I have definitely worked for many a boss who did not have any tolerance for failure. They're really hard to work for, honestly. When I give advice to younger people about bad bosses, what I tell them is this. I say, look, you're going to have bad bosses. It's like failure in that failure is an inevitability. You will fail, right? And in the same way, if you work out in the world, you will encounter a bad boss sooner or later. It is inevitable.
Yeah.
You will. The good news is that there are probably an equal amount of good bosses that are out there too.
Yeah.
Right? So there is that. It's not like they're all bad, right? But you will have your share. What I tell people is you've got to get through that bad boss, right? Don't try to change them. Don't think you're going to be an influencer in their life. It's not going to happen. Don't try, because it's going to be really hard to try to change them unless they're open to it. Right. A lot of times what they are is they're untrained. They're untrained for the job. They're the salesperson who actually, I worked for that guy. I worked for that guy. I worked for the salesperson who was excellent in sales and got promoted. And he was a horrible manager. He was horrible. One of the worst bosses ever. But I'll tell you, I was a leader under his supervision. Okay, so I was a leader working in his organization, and he helped me to really sharpen my leadership ability.
Exactly.
So I learned two things. I learned how to become a better leader. I also learned what not to do as a leader.
Just take notes.
Take notes. Take notes. Get through it. Take notes. Don't try to change them, but figure out A, why they became the boss, and B, what you can actually learn from them. I learned that this guy was a master at politicking. And that's how he made it based on his relationships and his high performance as a salesperson. But what I learned from him was I learned critical thinking. I learned detail orientation. I learned how to be a better leader as a result. So there are things we can appreciate from those people who don't tolerate failure. They're hard. It's hard, but it's inevitable. But we can get through it, and we can learn a lot.
So head down, take notes, learn from their
That's
failures.
my advice. That's my advice.
Ellen, you're laughing. Have you been there too?
And know that you always have a choice, right? I mean, you have a choice about whether or not you want to stay in that role.
Always.
Or go someplace where you are appreciated, where people encourage you to try and be risk takers and things like that. So remembering that you always have a choice. And I do feel like you can influence some really tough leaders just by the way you behave, the way you provide leadership. And when they see that, they may, and 10 to 9, or 9 to 10 times they won't, but they may say, oh, so Mark's really doing a good job here. And so they may be learning from you. So I always feel like you're in that kind of position that you can be the best that you can be, and then go from there.
I love that. Clay Scrogan has a book called How to Lead When You're Not in Charge. And that I learned a lot from that book, when you're in those situations.
It's hard.
So our oldest daughter played soccer all the way, she was probably 4 when she started, played all the way through high school, and was pretty successful at it. And then she went to a Division I school, didn't play soccer, but played another sport at a Division I college, university. And one of the things we started drilling into her early was you will have great coaches and you'll have bad coaches. But the idea of you being a better soccer player, being a better athlete is more determined on your personal responsibility than your coach. So if you have a coach, and she did have seasons early on where they didn't win a game, and so we taught her early on, like, I'm not the dad that's going to go yell at the coach. I'm not doing that. If you're going to be a better soccer player, that's up to you. So what I would say, in a world that we have put personal responsibility on the back burner, that everything is somebody else's problem, you're going to have people that have unrealistic expectations. You're going to have unrealistic bosses. They exist in every industry, at every time, all the time. If our performance is based solely on the people above us, then that's pretty shallow. So the idea that I become a better person, whatever I'm doing, I become better at it because I determine I want to be better at it, regardless of who's above me. And if that was the case, anybody that had parents that didn't live up to the expectations would automatically be doomed forever. Anybody that had mentors that didn't live up to it would automatically be doomed forever. So the idea of personal responsibility, that there's a season in my life where I've got a really difficult boss. And but I'm going to determine whether I get better or not.
It's so much more powerful when it comes from within you. Like if I'm living to please my boss, or I'm living to please my parents.
Those are short-lived
They are.
things,
They are. But man, when you can dig down and reach into yourself when it's for you, that is incredibly powerful. Great point. Yeah.
So taking good notes, leading when you're not in charge, leading from the bottom up, and then just not playing the blame game, not.
And growth becomes transcendent, not dependent on whatever circumstance you're in. Growth just is what happens in your life, regardless of your circumstance. So.
Yeah, that's good. Continuing this theme, just kind of thinking about young, up-and-coming leaders, I think, correct me if I'm wrong, I think we're probably seeing an exodus away from failure, just, wanting to seek safety, I'm speaking for myself. I feel like our generation we've fumbled in a lot of ways. We've fumbled with how we've handled the economy. We've fumbled with how we've handled politics and, pandemic and a lot of things. And so I think we have a younger generation looking up to us, and kind of this fear of failure is building in them. What would you guys say is what's a good piece of advice that you would give this up and coming generation about, should we have a fear of failure or not? What have we learned?
One of the issues is it's naive to think it's not going to happen. So start there. I think what's happened in our culture is that when I was growing up, there wasn't. You used to talk about people wearing a mask. You're in high school, and they act a certain way in school, and then they da. Well, that was a limited exposure. Now we've created whole worlds that we can put that facade on. We've created whole, cultures where failure isn't even in existence. Like nobody puts, nobody goes on Instagram and like my, 47. That's why we have filters on Instagram, because we can't even let our face fail.
Face fails a lot.
As we're getting older, you know what I mean? So that's created this unrealistic expectation that an Instagram reel or highlight is going to be my life, and it's not real.
Right.
And so embracing that and not being afraid of it, and just going into life with the idea that I am going to try some things that don't work. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to hurt people. And coming to that conclusion. And when I do those things, what is my response going to be? And what the faith world that I work in, the principles allow us to predetermine our response to that. So if I fail, I've predetermined that I'm not a failure. That's not my story. If I hurt somebody, I predetermine how I deal with when I hurt somebody. If somebody hurts me, I've predetermined how I deal with that. And in a world where everything's happening so fast all the time, and it's really good to predetermine how you're going to do some things. And so if you're 25 years old, it'd be really good to sit down with somebody that's 50 or 60 or 70 and go, hey, can you help me come to some conclusions about when this happens? How am I going to deal with it?
Yeah.
And when we don't do that, then it can be a wide-ranging spectrum of responses. But when I get a set of core values in my life, in my life it happens to be faith-based core values. This is when these things happen. When somebody treats me horribly, when I get a bad boss, when I fail somebody, when I hurt somebody, these are going to be my responses. And when they're built in and predetermined, then I can keep moving forward.
Yeah. That's good.
Yeah.
Mark, what would you say about like being afraid to take risks? You know, like the next generation has watched us fail in a lot of ways that might make them afraid to take risks. What would you say to that?
I will say this as somebody who takes risks a lot. I would say that you're not living your best life ever unless you take a risk.
Yeah.
I loved what you said, Chris, about having pre-installed responses. I love that. And I think this question, I think, is extraordinarily important today because of the up-and-coming generation that we've helped to create, unfortunately. We don't want you to, like, we failed, we know what that feels like, and that's hard, but we don't want you to feel that. Here's a participation trophy or a participation ribbon.
We went there.
I love my youngest daughter. She did competitive swimming, and they would give her a participation ribbon, and she would literally say, "I hate this thing," you know, because she's like, she sees there's no value in that.
Yeah.
But that said, you're not living your best life unless you take some risk. Absolutely. Failure is absolutely going to happen. And you know, we need to turn the filters off. You know, we need to be authentic. We need to be ourselves, and we need to go for it. And if we don't take any risk, we are going to allow, what we are in effect doing is we are ceding control to everybody else. We're ceding control to the government. We're ceding control to our parents, our bosses, our friends, God forbid, our peers to determine the outcome of my life. We are placing the responsibility of our life on them, and we need to, as many of us have said, as Chris said very well a moment ago, we need to take responsibility back for that, and take risk. We're not living our best life if we don't. I think, because when we often when we take a risk and we win. Holy cow! What that does for your confidence, you're a businessman, and you've had equal share of successes and failures, and you're a businesswoman as well. Those are risks, right? And when you see it working, you as well. You're all entrepreneurs in some form or fashion. When you see that risk come to fruition and it works, it pays off, or you persist and you see the fruit of it, there's nothing that builds you like that. Risk is enormously important. We can manage the downsides by putting some mitigations in place. Business is really good at this, business in general, at looking at risk and putting mitigations in place. But we live in a very risk-averse culture that I think it's actually dangerous for us, as individuals, not to take risk. I'm not saying go jump off a cliff. That's not what I'm talking about. And we need to be measured and calculated about how we take risk, but rather we need to be a little bit more out of the box, a little bit more imaginative about our life.
Yeah. Mark,
And
you
what it
mentioned
could be.
fruit. I heard someone once say where do you find the fruit? It's out on a limb.
So
you
go
got to
out,
take
right?
risk for it. So
That's right.
Mary Ellen, what do you think?
What I heard Chris say too was being clear about what you value and that kind of thing, and living your authentic self, which I think is really pretty important. I think that's hard for young people because they are so influenced by peers and what they're doing and things like that. And the other thing, just to add, certainly echo what you gentlemen have said, but then also getting comfortable with the uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So if you have an opportunity, it's like, oh, I could never do that. It's like, well, why can't you do that? Just go ahead and do it, right? So just doing things that you wouldn't ever see yourself doing, I think, is really pretty important. That failure is going to happen, and the more uncomfortable you can get with kind of what's coming your way, the greater success you'll have, I believe, as well. So getting uncomfortable sometimes.
I think as far as risk is concerned, there's an important thing to remember. We typically compare ourselves to other people without first leveling the field.
Yeah.
And there are certain personality types that have a head start with risk.
What do you mean by that?
Because they're less averse personality-wise to failure.
Yeah.
It's just like, I didn't even remember it happened. And they don't have to go through the 15 what ifs if this thing doesn't go well. So if I'm comparing myself, who I may not be that person. If I'm comparing myself to you or to you who have that like head start personality-wise, I can be like, well, you just jumped out there and did it, and I don't know, I can't, like, I'm just a failure, I can't figure that out, I don't want to take the risk. Knowing who you are and how you process things is an absolute necessity to then being able to determine how much risk you're willing to take. So if I compare myself to Mark, who just seems like, well, he jumps in the deep end every time, just like, I don't know, I got my suit on, I'm just jumping in.
Yeah.
Well, I could be discouraged by that because inherently that's not who I am to start with. It doesn't mean I can't take risk.
Right.
It means I need to know who I am inherently, and then be able to get somebody like you that could come along beside me and help me work through those initial things to get to the risk, knowing that it's still worth it, but I'm going to have a different path than he is to get there.
Right.
And that's important because we don't compare apples to apples. We're comparing me with you or me with you, and we didn't even figure out if we have the same risk tolerance up front. Yeah. And so I'm either better than everybody or I'm not as good as anybody. And for a young person to start to figure out what that is up front is very important. And if you're young here, it's important to have somebody, again, that's walked through it a few times and saying, hey, I know where you're coming from. I've coached people that start off like you. I understand what's going on. So knowing who you are and establishing that up front is important.
That comparison thing is really, really powerful and relevant in this conversation.
It can be devastating if not done well. Yeah.
I want to add just one little thing. For people who are really risk averse, and again, this generation is highly risk averse, I would encourage them to start small.
Yeah.
Just start small. Do something a little. I heard this one great say. Actually, my daughter, my older daughter, said it to me because she's going through an economics class, and something that she learned was that everything you want is waiting for you outside of your comfort zone.
Yeah.
When you get beyond that, your life becomes so much more exciting. So flirt a little bit with the uncomfortable.
Good point.
Start small. You don't have to go again. You don't have to go all in or go home, but do a little bit. Where you're getting outside of your comfort zone.
I heard someone once say you got to fire the bullets before you fire the cannonballs.
Absolutely.
Gotta practice your shooting technique, and then you can bring out the big guns. And so that's really good, sound advice. Yeah. Well, guys, we have just a few minutes left, so I want to do a little bit of a rapid fire round. We've talked a lot about the importance of authenticity. No filters. Figuring out kind of what you're called to, and not worrying about comparison.
Yeah.
if you could maybe just give us a couple, in a couple sentences or so, what are some practical ways that we as leaders and as up-and-coming leaders can practice authenticity? And if possible, I want you guys to make this as practical as possible, something that they can write down, something that they can actually do to start practicing a more authentic life where, we're not trying to put on this idea of being successes 100%. What does that look like? And I'll let you guys jump in as it comes to you.
I think just know what's important to you. Is family important? Is faith important? Is, what brings you joy? When are you the happiest person that you can be? Would be my thought.
So just paying attention to what brings you joy, and then how does that help you foster authenticity?
Well, I think just knowing when you're at your very best, what you're doing, what you're thinking, what you're feeling, that and doing more of that will bring you to a point of knowing who you are.
Yeah.
And then you'll be able to make other kinds of choices and take more risks and things like that. The other thing I'll say is if you believe you can or you can't, you're absolutely right.
Yep.
Right?
That's good.
Yeah.
I think the higher I get in leadership, the more important it is for me to own my mistakes quickly. Very quickly.
In real time.
Real time. I think there's a sense once you become a leader, you have to have this kind of armor on that nothing penetrates. You don't let them see you sweat. That whole thing, and everybody around you knows that's not real. They just know it's not real inherently. So if as a leader, one of the things you start realizing really quick is that everybody already knows. They already know you messed up. They already know. They knew before you did. They've been in the office talking about it. And so when you find out, just own it quickly. That's the most authentic a leader can be. Hey, you know what? I blew that. I shouldn't have said that. I shouldn't have done this. I made a commitment to you that I didn't keep. And then when the team you're leading knows that you're going to be real when you have deficiencies, then it gives you the platform to be able to look at them and say, hey, this is, I need you to step up now. This is the culture that we've built here, that everybody owns it, everybody steps up. Yeah. And so the older I get, the more I find that to be extremely important. I probably wish I would have done it more with my kids when they were growing up, just to be able to say, hey, Dad blew that. But I'm trying to make up for it now.
Yeah. I hear you. Mark, thoughts on authenticity?
I love what you both said about like knowing your values, knowing what's important to you, knowing what brings you joy. That's knowing what brings you joy. Like what's important to you. This this up and coming generation is so concerned about what other people think. And it's magnified through our technology. I think that the thing that I try to remember when I'm challenged with that question, and I am challenged with that question, is always making sure that I'm authentic. Absolutely owning my mistakes and being the first to voice it, right? I blew that. But the thing that I always think about is that other people are thinking more about themselves than they are of you, genuinely. Like, if I walk into a room, everyone there is, what I tell myself is everyone there is more insecure than I am. And that gives me some courage.
Yeah.
Actually.
Yeah.
A little bit, maybe 1%. But, if I know that everyone else is really more focused on themselves than on me, then that gives me a little bit more courage to be myself.
Yeah.
And I'm the only me. And you're the only you.
Yeah.
We are. That's what's so amazing about the world. I love what you said about comparison, because we're not really comparing, because I'm the only me and you're the only you, and that's not really even a comparison. And comparison by its very nature is illogical.
Yeah.
So it doesn't make sense even, because we are the bundle of our own unique experiences and our upbringing and the jobs we've had and the people who've influenced us. We are the only one. And what a privilege, what an amazing privilege that is to be the only one of me in this world. I don't have to be like them, you know, and I don't need a cat filter to make me look better, you know. They're more concerned about themselves than they are about me. And that gives me a little bit of courage to be more authentic.
Yeah. There's only one you. That's a perfect note to end on. So, Mark, thank you. Mary Ellen, thank you. Chris, thank you. This has been a really insightful conversation. I can't wait to watch the replay. So we want to give another shout out, a big thank you to our sponsors, Keller Williams Premier Realty and Integrity Imaging Solutions. And our audience can watch some videos from them right now.
Great.